Seems to be running out for South Africa to secure a trade reprieve from the US. Just 48 hours to go before steep tariffs from Washington kick in. Our Trade Department is still waiting for a response to its proposed framework deal. Our offer includes major investment incentives and a pledge to boost shelf space for US goods, including products like American blueberries. Business reporter Ntokozo Khumalo, tracking the story, joins us now from Midrand. Ntokozo, good morning. It's a big question. Do we know if there's enough on the table to satisfy Washington? Where does meeting these commitments come for our other trade partners?
Good morning, Stephen. Well, I suppose this is where politics and trade interject. But to help us answer that question, I am with Sizwe Gcayi, who is the founding partner of SGL Africa, and you also an international trade and investments attorney. Talk us through that. It seems a lot was put on the table by the DTIC to appease the US. What does that mean for our other trade partners? Is it really a lot on the table?
Yes, thank you very much. And also, I think it's important to look at the holistic context of what is happening here. There are domestic developments politically in the U.S. where there are feelings that the U.S. has been ripped off, and President Trump has been articulating that. But the second point to consider then within a global context and in terms of our relationships with our trading partners, one is to take into account the fact that South Africa has a number of preferential trade agreements, the most significant being the one with the European Union. And you must imagine that, remember, that was concluded around about 2016. And before that, there was a preferential dispensation that we had with the European Union before that. What is the relevance of that? My view is that the Americans have been very patient with South Africa because one of the considerations has been that the EU has been getting preferences in South Africa, and obviously that's reciprocal between ourselves and the EU. But on the other side, it has been a one-way flow, one may argue, with the US, although that's not necessarily a factual analysis. But we've been getting everything that we want from the US. And the US has been feeling like they are very frustrated with the way that we've been treating them. So their analysis is that we must get something in return now. Of course, underpinned by domestic politics in the U.S.
And now, could the proposal that we have put down on the table now actually be of benefit when it comes to economic growth for South Africa, and how?
So there are two dimensions that one must look at in terms of the proposal that has been put forward. Firstly, we've not seen all the details. So the DTIC has been sharing information trips by trips. What we must appreciate, at least on their part, is that they've shown the seriousness around the matter to say that the U.S. is an important trading partner, and therefore they had to respond within the shortest space of time. There are many technocrats within the DTIC who have been talking about developing a comprehensive trade relationship with the U.S., but that work has been coming in drips and drips. Now, all of a sudden, President Trump comes in. We've had to do a quick turnaround. There are concessions being made, for example, in terms of commitments of having South African companies investing in the U.S. We have presence there already, but now there's a demand to see more investment on our part there, which is a good positive for us as well, because it positions us to say, let us demonstrate our global competitiveness. And it's actually in the long term, we are going to be viewed by the global community in a positive light to say there's a lot of competent companies in South Africa that are capable of competing at the highest level. So it may seem like a short-term punishment, but actually in the long term, we're going to realize benefits out of that.
Sizwe, before I let you go quickly, in this impasse with the US, the big talk has been tapping into alternative trade markets and building on trade relationships, intra-Africa trade being a big talking point. How fast are we moving there when it comes to really diversifying our markets as well?
I mean, if you look at the work, so there are two elements to think about here. So in terms of intra-African trade, you must remember that with the Africa Free Trade Agreement, we were not starting from a blank slate. There were regional trading blocks in Africa that existed before the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement was concluded. Now, those regional trading blocks were used as a springboard to say, now, how do we leverage what is already existing to say, let's have more intra-African trade, leading to the Free Africa Trade Agreement. So institutionally, in terms of establishing the Secretariat, laying out the regulations that need to be in place in order to enable the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. I think a lot of work has been done. A lot of countries have ratified the agreement, and already trade is being conducted on those bases. I think what's important for South African exporters is now to say, in terms of how we develop our strategies now, we must look holistically into the instruments that we have to trade with different partners all over the world. Because the issue now that comes into play is that you can't overly rely on one market, because what happens now when the U.S., there will always be domestic politics, in the U.S. and Europe and all of that. We must always then to say we are able to shift our, the flow of our trade to different destinations all over the world. And I think that the level of investment that is required internally now amongst African countries must not be underestimated. I think that we don't have time on our hands in terms of, we have populations to feed, young people need to get work, and trade is the quickest way to facilitate that. So in the grand scheme of things, I think a lot of work can be done to fast-track the implementation, but let's not underestimate the fact that we don't have the right infrastructure to speedily execute that. So our governments must be focused on investing in the infrastructure financially, in terms of how we move the trade linkages. A lot of work needs to be done.
Well, Sizwe, I'll have to leave it there, but we will continue this conversation. Of course, Stephen Sizwe Gcayi is the founding partner at SGA Law International. He's also a trade and investment attorney. The company established in 2019 and dealing with some of those issues. So on both ends, Stephen, both when it comes to U.S.-South Africa trade relations as well as fast-tracking intra-Africa trade, the tone being that we are running out of time, Stephen, and serious plans need to be put on the table. But we will be following this story, hopefully speaking to some businesses that do exports to the U.S. to hear their perspective on, just as the clock is ticking, 48 hours until those tariffs kick in on Friday, Stephen.
Ntokozo Khumalo, thanks very much indeed. I do appreciate that update.